Hello, welcome to the new Paranormal. I'm glad you made it. I'm your host, Professor Joseph Dent. I believe the scientific community is on the brink of a shift in thinking that will turn the current paradigm on its head and upend everything we currently believe about reality and our place in the universe. To put this into perspective, you can imagine the chaos that was caused in the 16th century when Galileo and Copernicus told everyone that the Earth revolves around the Sun and not the other way around. Adopting a heliocentric model was so disruptive that they literally burned scientists and philosophers at the stake because of it. We are about to trade scientific materialism in for a model in which consciousness is fundamental and primary. While it does appear to be a more accurate model and it solves some problems which have confounded physicists for decades, it also opens up possibilities which some people may find uncomfortable. For example, what we currently think of as paranormal activity would immediately become plausible under this new framework. This channel is dedicated to tracking the evidence for this paradigm shift and to discussing the implications that go along with it. Today, we're going to take a look at the pineal gland and how it relates to our conscious experience. Let's get started. Did you know that there was a tiny structure about the size of a pine nut buried deep in the center of your brain? And for thousands of years, various cultures around the world have been describing it as a gateway between worlds. Across cultures throughout history and embedded in different belief systems, people keep coming to the same conclusion, that the pineal gland might be more than just a biological organ. It might be a bridge across reality. Today, we're going to explore that idea, from ancient medicine to modern science. And we're going to ask a deceptively simple question. Why does this tiny structure keep showing up over and over again in humanity's theories about consciousness? Before we get into the history, let's orient ourselves a bit. The pineal gland sits almost perfectly in the center of the brain, tucked between the two cheeks or hemispheres, tucked into a groove where the two halves meet. Now, there are a few things that we know scientifically. It regulates melatonin production, it helps control sleep-wake cycles, and it responds to light and dark in the environment, otherwise known as night and day. And there are some rather curious things about it, too. It's one of the only structures in the brain that is unpaired, meaning there's just one of it, rather than one on each hemisphere. It sits right in the middle. And in some animals, this structure is actually light-sensitive, like an eyeball, but it can't actually see the way an eyeball does. In animals where it is able to detect light, it is not acting the same way as an eyeball does. It's basically just a simple biological sensor. But that simple biological sensor has sparked centuries of speculation. Let's begin with Galen, who was a Greek physician in the 2nd century. His understanding of human anatomy was due in large part to his role as the chief physician to the gladiator, but he was also the personal physician of several Roman emperors, including Marcus Aurelius. Galen realized that the pineal gland was something unusual. He thought that the function was mechanical in nature, helping to regulate the flow of spirits through the brain's ventricles. I'm not entirely sure what Galen meant by spirits, but we do know that to Galen, the pineal gland stood out as something that was structurally and functionally unique, that this part of the brain was somehow different and distinct from other parts of the brain. In Eastern Hindu yogic traditions, we find the concept of the third eye associated with the 6th chakra, which is described as the center of intuition, the seat of inner vision, and a gateway to higher awareness. But guess where they locate the third eye? It is in the exact same spot as the pineal gland. Not right next to it, not metaphorically. It is at the anatomically precise location of the pineal gland. In these traditions, activating the third eye is said to allow perception beyond the physical senses, insight into deeper layers of reality, and direct experience of consciousness itself. They're using different language to describe it, but similar to Galen's idea, they're describing a central point in the brain which is linked to expanded perception. Our next stop is ancient Egypt. One of the most iconic symbols in Egyptian mythology is the Eye of Horus, which has been compared to a cross-section diagram of the human brain. When overlaid, we can see that the curves align with major brain structures, and that the central region corresponds approximately to the pineal gland. Personally, I find this comparison to be dubious at best, but symbolically, the Eye of Horus represented protection, healing, and perception beyond the ordinary. If you're willing to accept this symbol as a cross-section representation of the human brain, then it becomes very interesting that it points to perception beyond the physical world, similar to the ideas in ancient Greece and India. In the 17th century, the French scientist and philosopher René Descartes proposed that the pineal gland was the seat of the soul. To Descartes, it was the perfect candidate for a point of interaction between the physical and the non-physical because of its location at the center of the brain and because it was a singular rather than a paired structure. It seemed like an obvious meeting place between two worlds. Today, modern neuroscience understands the pineal gland to produce melatonin, which regulates circadian rhythms, influencing sleep, wake, and seasonal cycles. However, there is ongoing research looking into the role it plays in states of consciousness, dreaming, and end-of-life experiences. Some researchers think the pineal gland might produce DMT, which causes intensely altered states of consciousness, and it would be very interesting if it was true. But so far, this hypothesis has not been confirmed by the research, at least not yet. For now, the jury is still out, but the research is ongoing. To fully comprehend why this is such a fascinating hypothesis would require a detailed look at the effects of DMT on our conscious state of awareness, which is in itself a complicated question with a complex answer. So I'm not going to get into it right now, but let's put a pin in it, and I'll come back to it in its very own episode sometime in the near future. But I digress, so let's get back to the subject at hand. We have looked at examples from ancient Greece, India, ancient Egypt, European philosophy, and modern neuroscience, and we have found a common thread. There's a structure in the center of our brains associated with perception, and in many traditions, it is linked to something beyond the physical senses. Now, are all these traditions describing the same thing, or are we just seeing the similarities and assuming the connection to an unusual biological structure? That's the real question, because if the meaningful connection that ties these cultural beliefs together has been imagined after the fact, well, then there's nothing to see here and we can all move on. But if this really is humanity arriving at the same conclusion over and over again, and that conclusion points to the place where biology becomes experience and to where perception extends to someplace beyond the visible world, then we might need to take a closer look at this tiny structure, because it could be doing a whole lot more than just regulating sleep. It could be our pathway to a much deeper understanding of reality, but we'll have to wait and see. Well, that's where we'll leave it for today, but in future episodes we're going to come back to this topic and see how it connects to consciousness research, near-death experiences, and the broader question of whether the brain produces consciousness or receives it. Until next time, remember that I love you and stay furious. All power to the people.